glad you all could be here. We're going to talk about tips and strategies for acing the SAT and ACT today. And we have two great panelists with us. My name is Hallie Caldwell, and I work with Quad Education, and we're a company that works with students to help them prepare for the college application process, prepare their applications, decide what schools to apply to, basically everything from start to finish, having to do with college applications. So today I'll introduce our panelists. We'll talk about the SAT and ACT and what they are, the sections in each of them. We'll talk about general strategies and then specific strategies for the SAT and ACT, test day tips, and then we'll have a Q&A. So feel free to pop in questions as you have them, and we'll get to those at the end. So today I have Dan and Ariana with us. They're two fantastic consultants that work with the Quad Education. Dan, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Happy to be here, and also happy to talk about this topic. I'm kind of one of those weird people who thinks that standardized tests are kind of fun and kind of a game, a sport or something like that. So this is kind of a fun topic to talk about. I'm a two-time graduate of Stanford University, and I really enjoy working with students on their college applications.
Great. Thanks so much, Dan. Thanks for being here. And then we have Ariana. Ariana, can you give us a little intro?
Absolutely. I'm Ariana Lee. I graduated from Dartmouth College way long ago, and similar to Dan, I don't mind standardized tests. It's just another way to kind of, see how well you can do, how well you can top your last score. Are they necessarily fun? Well, that's up to you to decide, right? Glad to be here.
Thanks. Pleasure to have you both. All right, so let's dive in and talk about what are the SAT and ACT, what makes them a little bit different. Either of you want to start us off?
Sure.
Happy to kick it off.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
This is probably not news to most of you, but SAT and ACT are the college entrance exams. So they're one of the things that are kind of an important milestone on the road to college. SAT is from the College Board, and ACT is the American College Testing Association. So two different organizations that put out these tests. But there's some differences, but also kind of a lot of similarities in terms of like how you approach them, how you prepare for them. And basically they're just assessing your college readiness. And so they're looking at some of those core skills in math and reading, writing, science, if you're doing the ACT. And they're just a way for colleges, they're just one of many ways for college admissions teams to kind of get a holistic view of an applicant. And so this is one of the things that they can do to compare across all the different types of schools and backgrounds that students come from.
Great, thanks, Dan. Ariana, do you have anything else to add to this?
Well, outside of the fact that, a lot of times admissions officers or schools, it's hard to compare GPA because all schools are not the same, all classes may not be the same. So just as Dan said, this is to kind of just compare everybody across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So we'll talk a little bit about the SAT and the sections and how those break down.
Awesome. Yeah. So when dealing with reading, of course, the reading section, you'll find the questions like how the words, understanding the words within particular context, how the author uses evidence, analysis in history or social studies and science. That will all be within that reading component section. And the time allotted for the reading section, 65 minutes, and you have 52 questions. So you get roughly a little over a minute for each question. And then writing and language, that's 35-minute breakdown for 44 questions, so a little less time. And that's dealing with like the expression of ideas, standard English conventions, with math, famous math, either calculator, no calculator, and that one's 80 minutes for 58 questions. I wonder why they give you a little bit more time. But anyways, total breakdown for the whole SAT test is 180 minutes for 154 questions. So definitely be prepared to strategize accordingly.
And it's super smart how Ariana is talking about, this many questions and this much time. And that should give you a clue, like as you're doing your practices, what is your like average time per question? If you only have time to do, you have 30 minutes to do some, you can't do the whole, the 65-minute reading exam, but you can say, hey, how many did I get in how much time? And am I on track to be able to complete the whole test? As somebody who's like a slower reader myself, this was one of the areas that I had to especially be very careful of, like managing my time well.
That's a great point. It definitely doesn't seem like quite enough time to fit in all of those questions.
Never does.
Yeah, we'll dive into some strategies to help with that.
Great. So here's a little bit more on that math breakdown.
Yeah, so the SAT here is focusing, doing a lot of focus on algebra and on linear equations. So in this math section, and actually, do we have the time for this math section? I don't have it here.
We don't have it here. I think it's 80 minutes.
80 minutes for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can kind of see, how it breaks down. These sections are, helpful to look at in terms of like identifying, which section is like my area of greatest growth to practice in. And so, but a lot of algebra, a lot of just kind of general problem solving, looking at data and charts and graphs and how do you read those well. Some preparations around like advanced math, and then a scattering of maybe some additional topics that you've covered.
Great. So here's the ACT breakdown, and then we'll dive into each of these more individually in the following slides.
So similar to the SAT, well, maybe not so similar, but the ACT English section is going to focus more on like the knowledge of language, the production of writing, and that breakdown is 45 minutes for 75 questions. And then for math, of course, we have the calculator or no calculator section because no calculators are allowed. So that one's going to be more integrated math modeling, and that's 60 minutes for 60 questions. So you get just enough. And then reading, that's focusing more key ideas, details, just more on the reading passage itself, focusing on those types of structure and craft of that section, and that's 35 minutes for 40 questions. And then ACT, unlike the SAT, it does have a science section. And that's dealing more with scientific investigation, the evaluation of models, you inferring and looking at experimental results. And that's 35 minutes for 40 questions. So total 175 minutes for 215 questions.
I'm noticing here there's a very big difference from the SAT, ACT, and the number of questions per time. Should that be scaring people off, or is it manageable?
Well, and Dan, you might be able to speak more to it too, but I've taken SAT and the ACT, and for me, my standpoint, I do think that the ACT is pretty straightforward. So that might be as to why the minute breakdown might be a little bit, the minutes might be less and the questions might be more because it is more straightforward for the ACT. Just depends though on who's taking the test.
Yeah, I would second that. I also felt like the SAT was a little bit more like puzzle solving, learn the tricks, learn the like strategies of it, and like you were saying, like ACT is like, hey, do you understand the content? Can you apply the skills? So just kind of a different approach, and you'll see that as you're if you're one of the we'll get into strategies, but you definitely want to take practice tests in both of these, and you'll get a sense for like how they each feel.
That makes a lot of sense. I remember when I had an SAT tutor, we talked a lot about how you have to understand the game to play. You don't need to necessarily understand each question to do well.
Yeah. And I think that's a good mindset. You know, how do you make it a game? How can it be fun? How do you challenge yourself and push yourself? And I don't mean to be flippant about that. I know like test anxiety is a real thing, like, and I know it can be really stressful as well. But if there's anything you could do to make it fun for yourself along the way, like definitely, you know, lean into that.
Absolutely. And I just want to say welcome to the folks that just joined. I know we had some technical difficulties this morning, so thank you for making it on. We've just gone through the breakdown of SAT, ACT sections, and we will go into more detail, and then we'll have a Q&A session at the end. So feel free to pop in your questions now into the Q&A area, and we'll get to those at the end. All right, so general test taking strategies.
Cool. So we've got a lot on this slide, and so I think maybe Ariana, if it's all right, we can kind of bounce back and forth on some of these here. This is like the good stuff of like, well, you know, what do we do as we prepare? What do we do on test day? All that sort of stuff. These first two ones here are about like, you know, preparing early, reviewing notes. You know, it can be sort of helpful for some of the content areas, and don't cram. Now, I would say, yes, it's not something you can cram for. Yes, a lot of the work that you're doing is like in school is preparing you for it, but it is its own skill, and you need to practice that skill of taking these particular types of tests. And although you shouldn't cram, I do recommend, you know, setting aside 2 months before or so as kind of like an intense, I say intense, a more focused practice period. So maybe you're doing something like, hey, 2 months before, I'm going to take a practice test every 2 weeks and kind of benchmark myself along the way. And then in between those 2 weeks, you're looking at like, what are the areas of greatest progress? Where are the areas where I can make the most progress, the greatest gaps? And this is a little bit different than what I might recommend to somebody like other life skills or other parts of like your application, where you're like, hey, focus on your strengths, lean into your strengths. When it comes to boosting your SAT score or ACT score, I definitely recommend what are the areas of greatest weakness, because if you can improve those, that's going to have the greatest impact on improving your score. So a little bit of a different mindset there. So, you know, doing those, I recommend like doing like a practice test every 2 weeks, find like the specific question types that you're struggling the most on, do some little drills, you know, in that, and then test again 2 weeks later. And if you're consistently acing, you know, or doing really well in one part of the test, when you do the practice test, maybe just don't even spend your time on that and just focus on improving those areas. But there's lots of different ways to go about this. This is one thing that worked really well for me, and that I've seen work well for other people, but there's lots of different ways to go about doing this well.
Absolutely agree. And if you're one of those students that you wait till the last minute to study and you just happen to ace the test, I would not risk that with the SAT or ACT.
Right.
Like Dan says, like just do a practice test. Don't make it a huge, you know, a huge barrier where you wait till the last minute, or you keep putting off to take the practice test because you're afraid or you have that anxiety. The only way to get over that anxiety or to help lessen it is to constantly just test yourself and let yourself be comfortable with taking and being in that testing environment. So even if it's a quiz every day, a little 5-minute quiz, or if it's a test every 2 weeks, or whatever it is to help you get over that anxiety, that's what you want to do.
Yeah, and I love what you said, Ariana, about the like testing environment. When you're doing these practices, I would, you know, something that has been shown to like work really well is recreating the actual test environment in your practices can really pay off. So that means like, I mean, some people take this to the extreme of like they'll like do their studies like in the room where they know they're going to test. That's not usually an option, but like it's sort of like gets to that principle of like, hey, make sure you're in an area of no distractions when you're taking the test. Try to do it the same time of day that you know you're going to take the test. Try to go through your test day routine where you're getting a good breakfast, you're getting a good night's sleep the night before. Anything you can do to make it as real as possible when you test will just help you be more comfortable and will help you focus better when it comes to, you know, when it comes to game day.
And also, even though I was guilty of doing this too, as far as practicing what you know the best, and you just love seeing the 100% or love like just reconfirming that you know what you know, practice on your weakest areas the most. That's the only way that you're going to get better at it and prepare better strategies for your weaker areas. Like Dan mentioned earlier, as far as reading, right? Like if you are someone who takes longer to read, maybe your practice is doing speed reading sessions, or if it's math or it's mental math, maybe it's working on that. Whatever it is, start, developing that into your study schedule.
Yeah, and on the reading one, so again, like that was one of my areas that I need to focus on a lot. And something that was helpful, this, focus on the passages that have the most questions, where I, if I knew I was going to maybe miss some, and I tried not to, but, trying to get the big passages first that have as many questions as possible. Yeah. That was helpful for me.
True.
Let's see, what else do we get here? So there's some good tips here about setting, goals and reaching towards those goals. If you're a goal-driven person, that can be really cool. Chart your progress over time, celebrate that progress as you go. We talked about practice tests, talked about setting aside a focus time. Let's see what else. Areas of greatest strength. Okay, I think we covered a lot of these here.
Yeah, and we're going to go into more in-depth details for specific sections. Awesome. All right, so SAT specific strategies. So SAT reading.
I was just waiting for is the slide updated on the reading section yet? Oh, there we go.
All right, you can see it okay?
Yes.
Yeah, coming through here.
Awesome. So for SAT reading tips, so in order to develop the best strategy, actually, maybe Dan, if you want to take this.
Oh, yeah. Sure. Yeah, this was an area where I had to focus a lot. I mean, trying to very quickly understand like what is what works for you, right? Sometimes it's helpful to skim the questions first so that you know what to find in the passage. Some of the passages can be a little bit long, and especially if it's like sometimes they ask. I'm thinking of I guess this is more ACT science section where they're asking for like data stuff. That can be fairly skimmable. SAT reading, yeah, sometimes previewing those questions can be really helpful, so you know what you're looking for. But you'll get a sense as you do your practice tests, things like that. Definitely a big fan of markup. Underline things, circle things you think are important. Add question marks to things that you wonder about. That's really good. I don't think we mentioned this, but I definitely recommend getting like, one or two, actually, I'd probably get at least two, practice books. Each of these exams has, the College Board or the ACT company puts out like their own practice tests, and those are good. But definitely like get some third party, I recommend at least two third-party books to look at. And so you could just get a much wider set of practice, and they also have specific tips and strategies for each of these sections. Highly recommend doing that. Let's see. So getting comfortable with skimming. If you're a lot of students we work with are kind of perfectionists, and I've been guilty of that too. Wanting to read very closely. Definitely a time to do that. Usually these tests are not the time to read super closely. So get comfortable skimming, reading the topic sentences, reading the conclusion of the essay first. All that can be, helpful. Yeah, and choosing the passages, whatever order you want. For me, that was taking a quick look at the exam and saying, which one has the most questions? And I'll start with that one first, because I feel like I'm making the most progress. And if I have to, at the end of the day, make a rush decision, I'm doing it on the passage with the fewest questions.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's a really good strategy to do it based off of like, hey, I know this has this many questions. I can actually focus on this a little bit more. And then if I have to, that's a good idea. And I'm guilty of reading the questions and then going back to the passage. Sometimes that helps. It's not for everybody, but it's just really discovering what is your rhythm what's the best strategy, because many people have many different strategies. So you want to kind of take what works from each of those strategies and apply it for yourself.
That makes a lot of sense. So writing and language tips.
Awesome. I know the slide is still. Where is it on? Okay, there it is.
Oh, there we go.
There it is.
Okay, cool. So for SAT writing and language tips, really great to start leaning in closer into your English class, memorizing those grammar rules. I don't know if you've heard this rule before, but the concise answers are often the most correct. Sometimes students will choose the longest answer, thinking like, oh, that one's the correct one. The opposite. Choose the ones that are most concise, straight to the point. Like Dan said, it's best to skim. This test is purposely the amount of time it is for a reason. They know that you do not have enough time to read the entire passage and answer every question, unless you're some type of speed reader, which that works for you. But skim, save long questions for the last. Try it, and as you're going through, try and get the main idea or the purpose. Try underlining or highlighting through the passage to go to the conclusion or go to the topic sentences, and trying to get that information from there to understand the relationships between the ideas. And of course, you can always go to, which I don't necessarily recommend with that section, but going to the answers and of the questions to try and see if there's something you might have missed, even though that's the last result, I would say, last resort. You have anything to add on that, Dan?
I think that's pretty good. Yeah. Right. The language section is kind of like the math section, which we're about to go into, where there are some things where you can like learn some tips, and you can learn some tricks and some shortcuts.
Yeah.
And investing some time in learning the shortcuts, whether it's in the grammar or the analogies or things like that, or in the math section, can pay off. So definitely get yourself some books that will kind of highlight some of those shortcuts, and that's part of the game of it. Like it's just like learning. Yeah, it's. I was going to come up with a sports analogy, but I don't have a good one, so I'll stop.
And don't second guess yourself. Don't go back through the test and redo all of your answers, because we're all guilty of that, and that might switch and you end up putting the wrong answer down. So
yes,
yeah.
I saw a study. Somebody should, like, this is just hearsay, but I heard about a study that said that actually most of the time people second guess that it's wrong. That maybe don't quote me on that, but it seems to be true for me anyway.
Same.
Me as well.
Yeah, your intuition is probably good, especially if you've done a lot of practice. Then you can trust your trained intuition on it. Okay, so math. So starting with this, like, you're memorizing the common formulas is just going to speed things up for you. And then also the shortcuts and the tricks. There's all sorts of like fun number tricks that you can learn that kind of like cut down on the time and help you, free up some time, free up some mental energy there. Get comfortable doing it without a calculator. If you, that's, that can speed things up as well if you can eliminate that crutch. We mentioned that linear equations are a big part of this test. So if you need to brush up on your class notes from anywhere, like, that's a good, looking at your algebra 1 class is gonna really pay off. Double check that your calculator is allowed. You don't want to show up and not have it, not have it work. Like, that would be a big bummer. And then when you're doing your practices, practice with the actual equipment that you're going to use. Make it as real as possible. See, turning the math language into symbols, marking up your paper similar to the reading section. Sometimes this can be a good trick, is starting with the answers and kind of working backwards. Sometimes that can save time. Sometimes I've definitely lost some time trying to do that too. So you'll get a sense in your practices which strategy will work best for you.
Yeah, that last one seems like if you're stuck, that's a way you can kind of help your way work through it, but maybe don't start with that.
Yeah, and I don't think we've mentioned this yet, but if you come across a question where you're like, I don't know what to do on it, it's okay to it's okay to skip and come back and visit.
Very true.
And then you can use these kind of last resort things.
That's a great point.
Very
Ariana,
true.
any other thoughts here before we?
I was just going to say with math, the math answers, beware of the ones that are basically it's just one number or just something very small off between each of the answer choices. That's sometimes the case when you're trying to work backwards. So really just try and use that as a last resort to kind of check your answer, but sometimes the answer choices are purposely almost the same. And that's in any section, that's in writing or reading or any of the sections.
Yeah.
The SAT they try to trick you.
No.
All right, so we'll dive into ACT specific.
They do, but you can beat them. That's the fun. That's the game.
That's the game.
Yes.
Okay. ACT, I feel like is a little bit less tricky, a little bit more straightforward, a little bit more grounded in the content, and that can, and that's something too. Is like as you take these practice tests, maybe one of these tests, maybe the schools you want to apply to, accept both, and one of these like jives with you a little bit more. Focus your time on that. Like that's cool. If you like the kind of trickiness in the game of the SAT, do that. If you like more straightforward, ACT, do that. Either way is fine. So I guess some of these things are going to be a little bit of a repeat, picking the passage in whatever order you want. I mentioned I like to do the big ones with not the big ones, the ones with lots of questions first. Skimming, you don't need the outside knowledge for this. So everything you need to answer the question is going to be right there in the passage. Use the line references throughout. They'll mention those in some questions. And then, mark it up. Yeah, kind of, pretty similar.
All right, we'll move on to the next one because I know a lot of these are similar to what we just went over.
Awesome. So ACT, similar, make sure you know your grammar rules or try to memorize them as much as you can. If you get questions that are in regards to transitional sentences or relationships, make sure to just really pay close attention. Test makers are sometimes out there to trick you, but that's why you are ahead of the game. You're studying, you're learning the strategies as to how to beat them. So make sure you pay attention to agreements with subject, verb, with the tenses. Make sure the tense is consistent. This is a strategy to kind of just cross out the answers that don't fit or don't make sense. That's an easy way to kind of narrow down your answer choices. And then also look for concise answers. And then sometimes it may seem that more than one answer is the right answer. That's why you just have to try and use these types of tips and tools to get ahead of that. Gain context by reading the passage and seeing what fits the most.
Something I would add here is when you're doing your practice tests, hopefully with some third-party books as well, they'll tell you why each of those answers is wrong. And that can be really helpful to start to get some pattern recognition on how they are trying to trick you and what are the common errors that are there. So don't just understand like why different answers are right, but try to understand why they're wrong. Why did you get them wrong? How did you get tricked in your practice tests? And then you'll be all the wiser when it comes to the real thing.
It's very true.
It's a good tip.
So on the math, this is pretty similar. The one thing I would call out here is on the ACT, you don't get your reference sheet. So all the more important to like make sure your formulas are, you know them, they're in your head, and you can use them quickly. And I think that's the main difference here. All these things are pretty similar.
Yeah.
Awesome. And then we have our science. Unlike the SAT, this is something very specific to the ACT. So you want to memorize your formulas. Again, you don't need outside knowledge to understand or answer the question correctly. You can look at the figures and the visuals. They usually give you a chart or some type of representation, a graph, where you can determine the right answer from what they've given you. Understand the scientific method. So they might ask you questions in regards to how to actually perform the research or about the particular methods used. Let's see, also make sure that you, again, Dan mentioned a good strategy, looking at the passage, seeing maybe one has more questions that you can kind of knock out a lot quicker than one that might have one question to it. So kind of strategize that way to better answer that section.
Yeah, and this is actually pretty similar to the reading section. So some of the strategies we mentioned there about skimming, not getting bogged down in every word or all the details, but looking for the information you need. That actually is like a good skill for college, of like, you have to do lots of reading and get a lot of the gist of it quickly and the main points quickly. So, it's both the game, but also that's like a real skill that, you're learning as you're doing the test practice, and you're refining that. Just to underscore the, looking at the figures, the charts, the data, a lot of questions focus in on that piece. So starting with that and understanding those quickly, and then skimming the passage to make sure you are understanding the chart correctly. That can be a strategy that can help you digest it quickly.
Those are all great tips. All right, so some test day tips.
So just kind of a recap. Don't cram, plan in advance. You're doing this webinar, so kudos to you already for thinking about this and getting ahead. That's awesome. Try to get enough sleep the night before. Try to have good hygiene that whole week, actually, because the sleep can be cumulative. So, just pay attention to that. Get there early, leave your home early. You don't want any of that stress cortisol to be in your body. Just whatever you can to be calm. Showing up 30 minutes early is cool. Then you can just relax and go, whatever it is. Some people like to have a little routine before. I like to stretch. I like to walk. That helps me, moving my body helps me manage my energy and stress and nerves. So whatever works for you. Some people like to be very calm and still, eating breakfast. I don't know. Haley, Ariana, do you guys have a favorite breakfast of choice for something like this?
Maybe oatmeal, banana, something light, nothing too heavy where you're gonna fall asleep.
Good point. Yeah.
I eggs.
For me, it's about having a full stomach, because I can't focus if I'm hungry.
That's true.
I feel like pancakes make me more sleepy. They make me full, things like that.
They're so
are
good.
heavy. They are.
That's true. See, I'm gonna be thinking about the pancakes and not the test, and then.
I like this last one of rewarding yourself. Set up and do this along the way, right? If you're setting a goal for yourself and you had a really good practice test, treat yourself, do something fun, plan it. A lot of you are really ambitious, work really hard sorts of people, and sometimes it's easy for us all to forget to celebrate.
That's true. And I like number 6 to practice deep breathing. Deep breathing. Make sure, even if you're stuck on a question and you're just overthinking it, you're stressed out, breathe. Even if it's during the test, just practice calming methods, whatever it is.
Yeah. Do either of you have any other tips before we go into the Q&A?
I don't think so.
These are really good.
Yeah.
All right. So Q&A, feel free to pop your questions into the Q&A box and we'll answer them. But kind of to start us off here, I think one thing that I know I heard a lot while I was studying for the ACT and SAT is that a lot of times people's brain work really well with one, but not others necessarily. Do you both find that to be true? If you like get a great score on the SAT, you might not do as well on the ACT, or do you think that that's just kind of a scare tactic?
Hmm.
I think people study to one, and
Mm-hmm.
they don't necessarily study for both. So I think that SAT is more like a puzzle. It's a different type of strategy than the ACT is, which is a little bit more straightforward. So I think that is why people say that they do well on one and not the other, because they've been preparing for one and not both, or one or the other. I personally, however, agree with that sentiment, though, that I like the ACT more. That's just me. That's just my preference.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that. I think that's good advice. I think look at what your college wants, and then take some practice exams, see what it works best for you, and then focus your efforts there. I think focusing is always like a good use of your time.
Yeah.
I also know a lot of students take the SAT or ACT more than one time. I know some people take it 3 or 4 times. Do you either have recommendations on like, should you really just be taking it once? Is a couple times okay? Do you have any philosophies there? Is it very dependent on the situation?
Well, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I think the test can be a useful benchmark, but this is of all the things in the college applications, this is the thing that I think applicants emphasize more than they need to.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying don't focus on it. I'm not saying it's not important. It is, but just be aware that there's a tendency to overemphasize this at the expense of maybe other important parts of your application and like yourself and your life, to be honest. But I'm a fan of preparing really well to do it once.
Mm-hmm.
Plan for like don't plan like, oh, I'm just going to take it and see how it goes, and then if I do bad, then I'm going to prepare to do the next one. I'm a fan of like doing it as well as you can the first time. And then there is a chance to like try to up your score if you want to later, but I wouldn't recommend planning on, I'm going to do it 4 times and lots of, like, I just don't think that's the best use of your time, just for you. So many other great things to do.
Absolutely.
That's just me.
No, I 100% agree. If you prepare for it enough the first time around, you won't need to take it any additional times. If you're a student and you all know your own respective, what you deal with, if you're a student who you got really anxious or something didn't go right the first time you took the test, or something happened and you feel like the circumstances have now changed where you can do better on the test, then take it again. But you really have to question and think, did I study? Is this going to be a different scenario than the original time that I took it? If that's not the case, then it's no need to not only waste your time, money, energy. It doesn't help anyone to retake it and nothing's changed for you.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. So we just got a question here. More and more colleges are becoming test blind or optional. What are they looking for if they're not looking at test scores?
They're looking at you. They want to know as much about the student. So with tests, when they test blind or test optional, it doesn't, it just adds additional emphasis to what you're already submitting.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have that additional sector of the test to calculate in your acceptance.
They're looking more at like extracurriculars, your essays, your recommendations. And then I guess that also poses another question of, if a school is test blind, how do you know when to submit your score?
You can look at published averages. The way I would think about this, and I'm curious, how, both of you think about this, but I mean, for sure, like if you're above the average of the school, like put it in, because then it's like a star for you. If you feel like it's on the weaker side for you, for that particular college, play to your strengths, right? So and they really are test optional. Like you can leave it out and choose to like really emphasize, a leadership opportunity in your essay, or like, have some other things that are really kind of your standout things. It's more of an art than a science of like when to include it, and it's part of like this holistic picture of like who you are, which is what they're looking for. They want people who are ambitious, who are bright, who are going to use the resources in the school well, who are going to contribute to the university environment and the community. And so if you're showing examples of like how you're doing that, how you're passionate, how you're getting involved, how you're service oriented, you work well with others, you do well in your class, like all of that holistic picture is really what they're trying to look at. Test scores is just one data point.
Great. Thanks, Dan. Another question we have is, what kind of math is on the ACT? Is there calculus?
Yeah, so no pre-calculus or calculus. So you're really best looking at your algebra and your geometry, maybe a little bit of trig.
All right. So if you have any more questions, this is the last question call. And if not, Dan, Ariana, any last thoughts before we close up for the day?
You can do it.
Yes, you
make it fun for yourself.
You got this.
Yeah. It's manageable, definitely. Not necessarily fun, but you'll get through it, and then you'll never have to take them again after you're done applying.
That portion, yeah.
You might have some other tests, but not the SAT, ACT.
True.
All right. Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you all have a great afternoon. We're going to send out a recording with this in an email, probably on Monday morning, so you'll have access to this whole presentation. And if you have any questions for Quad, feel free to give us an email, fill out a form on our website, and you can schedule a time to talk to some of our experts. But yeah, thank you all for coming. Dan, Ariana, it was a pleasure to have you both here again, and I'm sure we'll see you soon.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Y'all have a wonderful one.
Bye.